This is a breakdown of how I made this character, this Yeti character from Laika film Missing Link. So I made this for you guys on camera so you could see just step by step sort of what goes into making this type of character maquette. I'm Caroline McFarlane-Watts and we're talking moving miniatures, stop motion and practical effects. Missing Link was released by Laika in 2019 and I chose this Yeti Elder character because I just love this character design. Let's go! Blue and white polymer clay blended evenly into about 1.5 inch oval forms the beginning of the Yeti's head. A short piece of armature wire is inserted under the head as something to hold on to, much easier for working. And now a large ball-ended tool can be pushed in to make cavities for the eyes. Eyes are just pre-made white balls, just hardened in the oven before you work with them so you don't squish them. Layering small amounts of blue clay over the top for the brow and under the eyes for eyelids start to give it an expression. The added clay is smoothed with your fingers or a much smaller ball-ended tool. This Yeti has a rather shallow profile, so the nose was made using a thin sheet of pressed clay, cut into shape with a craft blade, blended on in 2 layers. The nostrils pushed in with a small ball-ended tool, and then the mouth was cut in with a craft blade and then finessed with a needle tool. This starts to get really fun to work on, because lots of wrinkles, lots of vertical lines are pressed in again with a needle tool, giving the face really lots of texture and age. Wasn't that easy? The Yeti head is done. Cured in the oven, hardened, cooled. Next stop, paint. Acrylic paints are what you want for polymer clay. In this case, a sort of a mermaid teal is used, a turquoise colour. When painting flesh, always use paint that's extremely watered down and build layers. That way you preserve some translucency, which is naturally inherent in the polymer clay. Having said that, the purple around the eyes are put on solidly. That's just the design of this particular character. It's such a brilliant design. I personally find that watercolor brushes, not acrylic brushes, work best for working on figurines like this that require so much detail. For blending especially, just watercolor brushes are much softer, much easier to work with. This character really starts to take shape when you add the black eyeliner around the eyes. It's a great way to pick out that expression. Eyes done, using the same black paint but much more watered down, the wrinkles are picked out. All those lines that were put in all around the lower face are picked out with this watered down paint. Tricky to film painting eyes because it's so fiddly, but it's pretty easy. Just brown dots for the eyes, black dots for the pupils. Head is done. The body. Tin foil is packed together to form the base underneath the clay. Packing it together tightly as I can, squeezing out any air, and ready to start layering on first just some basic super Sculpey because it's cheaper than using the coloured, and we're not going to see the colour of the clay anyway underneath. This is the yoga pose that the Yeti's in. The Yeti is seated with great posture in a yoga pose. No jokes. I did get some jokes about this part of the process, but no jokes. This is just a Yeti in a yoga pose. Then you can start conditioning thin sheets of white polymer clay, layering it over the top and blending. The shape takes form here by adding white clay and creating that cross-legged look. Head added, it becomes part of the body by layering more white clay, almost like a hoodie, over the head, blending it into the body with one's fingers. It's important to remember to cover your project when you're not working on it if it's white clay. Cover it with saran wrap, or as Brits would say, cling film, to keep off any dust. With the Yeti seated on a book, the long white hair is extended, trailing down towards the ground. This next stage was equal parts fun to do and tedious. Ball-ended tools were used to carve into the shapes of the hair, that long Yeti fur. So giving it some shape and movement in the hair, using the tools to carve out these long flowing lines. Whilst the silicone tool was great for carving shape and definition into the fur of the body, it was a tiny ball-ended tool that was best for the precise fur around the face. Did I say that last part was tedious? If you agree, you'll love this next stage. A needle tool refines all the fur, lots more tiny detailed vertical lines. More armature wire is used, cut for the arms, and then the Yeti hands were made off camera and they'll soon to be attached to those arms. These spindly little hands that were made using more of that blue polymer clay are now given a purple manicure with more acrylic paint. One of the reasons I make hands and arms separate to a maquette and add them afterwards is because it is just so much easier to be able to hold them up like this and work on them and then add them. Arms coated in white clay, they can be attached. Once positioned, the arms are blended into the rest of the body with more white clay, more of that long vertical fur. Still not hardened in the oven, the Yeti set aside under a covering of cling film or saran wrap. The helmet was made with brown polymer clay that had been run through a craft machine to make that nice thin sheet. It was then cut up with a craft blade and formed into the right shape. Some of the surfaces of this sort of beaten leather was textured with the ball-ended tool, and then tiny balls were added all around the trim for all that detail you see. Once hardened in the oven and cooled, dark paints really watered down were washed over the helmet into all those grooves to pick out some of that detail. And then lighter paints were dry brushed around the trim and picking out some of the relief, the details of some of the patterns. This was fun to do because working with really beautiful, good quality metallic paints is just so much fun to do. So antique gold acrylic paint was painted around the trim and various details around the helmet, carefully painted on that Greek pattern in the middle with a fine tip brush. I think I even went for 2 coats. That paint is just so beautiful and it looks brilliant when it's solid like that. Now it was a metallic copper acrylic paint that was applied around on all the studs of the helmet, and a cocktail stick, or as an American would say, a toothpick. In Britain we say cocktail stick. That was used to dab the copper paint on all of the studs. I think you'll find it's so much easier to use a cocktail stick rather than a brush when you're doing little tiny dots. Solid baby blue paint was used on the gems all around the outside of the helmet. For these, a fine point brush is fine. More brown clay was added to the helmet to be the straps, and at this point the helmet was positioned on the Yeti. The back of the helmet is made up of lots of tiny little brown squares, some with studs directly on the fur. At this stage, the whole Yeti is hardened in the oven. This is where it gets fun, or it certainly gets fun for me, because I see this maquette pretty much almost finished. It's just last touches now. So it's antique gold touches on all those little studs, again with the cocktail stick or toothpick. Extremely watered down blue acrylic paint, and I mean really watered down, is then brushed all over the Yeti in stages, and then the excess is wiped back off with cotton round. That way the Yeti looks white from a distance, but all those tiny lines of the fur are picked out in blue. It really makes the texture stand out. See, now all the tedium of sculpting all that hair is finally paying off because that detail's getting picked out with this blue paint. Adding the varnish to the eyes is what brings a character to life. The entire piece was completed with a Swarovski crystal superglued to the center of the helmet. One Yeti character maquette done.